everybody, welcome to A Course in Miracles Applied. Today's topic is lesson 194. I place the future in the hands of God. I apologize for the very crude background. It hides something that comes into play about halfway through, and I just didn't want it to be a distraction and be on the screen here. So today's segment is based on a transcript of a live A Course in Miracles class that we held, and the class was taped, but the quality was bad. So my friend Gloria, who is a participant, was kind enough to transcribe the part that you're watching right now. I then edited it to adapt it to this format. I hope it came out all right. I think it did. The topic is lesson 194. I place the future in the hands of God. To start, let me read the first two paragraphs of that lesson as some kind of some sort of meditation, and also as an introduction to the segment. I place the future in the hands of God. Today's idea takes another step toward a quick salvation, and a giant stride it is indeed. So great the distance is that it encompasses, it sets you down just short of heaven, with the goal in sight and obstacles behind. Your foot has reached the lawns that welcome you to heaven's gate, the quiet place of peace where you await with certainty the final step of God. How far are we progressing now from earth? How close are we approaching to our goal? How short the journey still to be pursued. Accept today's idea and you have passed all anxiety, all pits of hell, all blackness of depression, thoughts of sin, and devastation brought about by guilt. Accept today's idea and you have released the world from all imprisonment by loosening the heavy chains that locked the door to freedom on it. You are saved, and your salvation thus becomes the gift you give the world because you have received. Again, that is the first two paragraphs in lesson 194 in the workbook. I remember doing this lesson when I did it for the first time, and since then I could feel it. Growing up Catholic or having some kind of a Christian background, the notion of placing our future in the hands of God is very familiar. When we read it for a moment there, we can relax, right? We can exhale and experience the comfort this thought brings to us. Jesus picks us up where we are at that very moment. When we first read it, I believe it is literally meant to suggest for us to place the future in the hands of God. After a while, maybe 10 or 20 or 30 years or a lifetime later, we realize that there's a deeper meaning than simply saying, I place the future in the hands of God. Because even though this is a very nice statement and a very nice sentiment, the same as with all the other lessons that say, for example, I want the peace of God, or I am among the ministers of God and such, it is not easy, or is not as easy as we think at first. We can hold the thought in our mind for a minute and really mean it, but the rest of the day we're out in the world again and we have totally forgotten the lesson, and the moment we get stressed out or afraid of something, we tend not to think about it. If we lay on a gurney and we're being pushed into the operating room, we might be too scared to say and really mean, I place the future in the hands of God. Maybe the doctor, maybe the nurses, but God? So we're having difficulty holding on to that thought. That's why once we have worked with the course for a while and go back to that lesson, we are ready to dive a little bit deeper. One level below that first one, we become aware of how much we do not want to place the future in the hands of God. That's the obstacle. That is the block to the awareness of love's presence, that we don't want to place the future in the hands of God. We want to a little bit, for a little while, but not all the time, and certainly not all of our issues. The important ones we tend to not give to God. So the sentiment of the lesson moves away from that nice and relatively comforting thought that we have in the beginning, where we are asked to place the future in the hands of God, to something deeper. In paragraph 2 of the same lesson, Jesus tells us, accept today's idea and you have passed all anxiety, all pits of hell, all blackness of depression, thoughts of sin, and devastation brought about by guilt. The logic here is this. If we're honest, we must admit that we do have anxiety, and we are aware of our personal pits of hell, our depression, our thoughts of sin, and devastation brought about by guilt. We know all that about ourselves, if we're honest. Because we still experience this, we must not have placed the future in the hands of God, as Jesus suggests. It dawns on us, after years of practice, that accepting the idea doesn't simply mean reading it and for a second saying, okay, I'll do it, I'll place the future in the hands of God, and then 2 minutes later we're back in our ego. Accepting it would mean we would continuously and fully integrate it into everything and all aspects of our lives, without any reservation, without any hesitation. Jesus knows we're not going to do this because we're not there yet, right? But he gives us a glimpse when he says, accept today's idea and you have passed all anxiety. If you can imagine a life without any kind of anxiety, ever, without fear, without conflict, or any of the ego emotions we all have, that would be the outcome of having placed the future in the hands of God. Now, the next level is for us to realize that as long as we still attack others, blame others, or get upset in any way, we have not placed the future in the hands of God. Jesus says, accept today's idea and you have released the world from all imprisonment by loosening the heavy chains that locked the door to freedom on it. That was in paragraph 2 that we just read before. Our attack imprisons the world. The world of separation is only there because we have projected the idea of separation, of sin, of guilt, and of fear onto it. And if we would say and mean, I place the future in the hands of God, we would have nothing to project onto the world. There would be no belief in separation, no sin, no guilt, no fear. And if we were to place the future in the hands of God, we would automatically release the world from all imprisonment, because the world is imprisoned only by our projected guilt. Whatever we see in the news about people being persecuted, imprisoned, slaughtered, and anything else that happens in the world, whatever we see there, whatever we react to it, is only because of our belief in sin, guilt, and the corresponding fear. Without that, we would only see the love in our mind reflected back to us from the world. And Jesus then says, and your salvation thus becomes the gift you give the world because you have received it. Placing our future in the hands of God would be our gift to the world, because we would live in the Holy Spirit and we would see the world through the Holy Spirit's eyes, and there would be no guilt anywhere to see. That means there would be no imprisonment. There would be no anxiety, no fear, etc. We would no longer be able to attack our brothers if we were to place the future in the hands of God. The fact that we are still attacking our brother means we have not placed the future in the hands of God. This lesson, just like many, many other lessons, the whole course for that matter, are written on many levels. The first time we read it, when we start working with the course, it is what we said in the beginning: I place the future in the hands of God. If we're Catholic or Christian, we know exactly what that means. And then after a while, we realize that this is not really what it is, because it doesn't work all the time. We can't do it all the time, so there must be something in us that prevents us from doing this, from meaning the line fully. Why are we not doing this when Jesus tells us that we will have no anxiety, no sin, no guilt, no fear, we will not experience imprisonment or a sense of being trapped or anything like that at all? Why aren't we doing it? It is this question that, after studying the course for a long time, breaks through our defenses and begins to stare us in the face. If we have been students of the course for 20, 30, 40 years, and we still attack our brother, which we all do, that's when the question surfaces. Why am I not doing what Jesus tells me to do? And that is really the goal of the course, for Jesus to bring us to that point and realize why we are so resistant. He's teaching us that we have a choice between two diametrically opposed thought systems, the ego and the Holy Spirit, right? He makes those two thought systems very clear in the course. He urges us to ask ourselves why we aren't choosing the Holy Spirit more often. Why are we not choosing this? The answer is twofold. First, we're not choosing it because we're afraid. The most honest assessment of ourselves would be to say, I am too afraid to place the future in the hands of God, otherwise I would do it. That is the beginning of the end of the ego. As we have learned, quote, the ego can and does allow you to regard yourself as supercilious, unbelieving, lighthearted, distant, emotionally shallow, callous, uninvolved, and even desperate, but not really afraid. That is in the text, chapter 11, section 5. So once we acknowledge that fear is the only reason we're not placing our future in the hands of God, we are on the right track. The course is written on so many levels because we need to get through this web of fragmented emotions to the one emotion that is the cause of all the rest, namely fear. Each level in the course helps us untangle one of those thoughts and emotions. And when we begin reading and working with the course, it is very normal to simply say, I place the future in the hands of God, and feel better for a little while. But if we stay there, we won't get anywhere. We won't go any further on our journey. If our home is in the stars, the line, I place the future in the hands of God, when we first read it, is the tram we take from our house to the bus station. The bus takes us to the train takes us to the airport, and then the airplane takes off and flies us to Cape Canaveral. From there, we take a rocket spaceship to the stars, our home. But if we stay on the tram, which is relatively comfortable, if we use this line or any other line occasionally to make us feel better, to make our dream a little more pleasant, it will do just that. Make us feel better for a little while. There's nothing wrong with it. The only thing that could be wrong with it would be to think that we are now at the top of the ladder and that there's nowhere for us to go from here. that the course somehow has reached its curriculum's end. And that is the danger, because when we say, I've done the course, what else is in it for me? And then we go to another path, and we don't get the full healing and the full help the course can give us. Now let's go back to the line, I place the future in the hands of God, and dive yet a little deeper into the question why we are not choosing to do it. The first part of the answer, the first reason, as we said, is fear. Let's look at the second part of the answer, and for that, let's look at it from the perspective of time. Here's part of paragraph 1 again from lesson 194. Wait a minute, am I saying 194 or 193? Let me check, hold on. $194. Yeah, 194, sorry. Okay, it says, your foot has reached the lawns of heaven, the lawns that welcome you to heaven's gate, the quiet place of peace where you await with certainty the final step of God. How far are we progressing now from earth? How close are we approaching to our goal? How short this journey still to be pursued? The goal of the course is the peace of God. A more poetic phrase or image is the lawns of heaven. You can imagine them like a beautiful park, a light-filled plateau high up in the mountains where there's no more climbing. There's some ice, maybe a few coolers with refreshments. There are lawn chairs. There's nothing to do except relax and enjoy the beautiful vista. For the mind to relax means the guilt is gone, because relaxation and guilt cannot go together. They cancel each other out. And now the great reveal of this graph. Ta-da! Okay. The mind that reaches the lawns of heaven, the decision maker that reaches the lawns of heaven, has gone past guilt and fear. We cannot enter the lawns of heaven with a massive baggage of dirty, smelly, sticky, heavy guilt. We must leave it behind on our way up if we want to sit there and enjoy ourselves. The lawns of heaven are a place of peace from which we, quote, await with certainty the final step of God. Once we're here in this place of rest, the attraction of God will gently pull us toward Him. The lawns of heaven are a place beyond all obstacles. We rest in peace and quiet, awaiting the end of our journey. All of our brothers are there with us, and love is all we see in them, and love is all we feel for them. The question now is, if placing the future in the hands of God gets us to the lawns of heaven, from when can we place the future in the hands of God? From what point in time? We're slowly getting to this graph. I appreciate your patience with this. We can't do it from the future, right? And the past is already gone. Therefore, the moment we can place the future in the hands of God must be right now. It can't be any other time. It can't be tomorrow or a few seconds from now. It can't be yesterday or a minute ago. The only time we can place the future in the hands of God is now, at this very moment. There is no other time to do this, right? Makes sense. Just like the graph shows, theoretically, the decision maker can right now place the future in the hands of God and reach the lawns of heaven, right? In the present moment, the decision maker can reach the lawns of heaven, can make a decision to go to the lawns of heaven and stay there, right? At this present moment. That is the moment where the decision maker can do it. But why aren't we doing it? Why are we not deciding to place the future in the hands of God and experience peace? The reason is also visible in the graph. The Course says, now is the closest approximation of eternity that this world offers. That is in the text, chapter 13, section 4. So we're doing the workbook lesson. We sit down, we close our eyes, and we say, I place the future in the hands of God, right? At that very moment, we could do it. We could, in our mind right now, experience all-encompassing love, all-encompassing peace. Why aren't we going there? We said that the reason was fear. But why are we afraid? To answer this question, we must go back and review the ego's strategy. For the ego, the present moment is the greatest threat there is. As we said, only in the present moment can we decide to ascend to the lawns of heaven and to leave the ego behind. Only in the present can we make the choice for the Holy Spirit. That means the ego must prevent us from occupying this present moment. It must somehow block access to this present moment. We all have experienced waking up in the middle of the night with all kinds of crazy thoughts going through our head, right? We all have that. Problems, issues, things we need to do, things we fail to do, relationships, people, money, health. In short, a constant stream of thoughts. And if we were to stop and look at those thoughts, we would realize that those thoughts are either about the future or about the past. Why can't we be in the now, in the present moment, without thoughts about the past and about the future? Why can't we do that? Without those thoughts, we could theoretically float up to the lawns of heaven. Those thoughts that seemingly prevent us from being in the present are purposive. They're not there by chance. The purpose of our thoughts about the future and the past is to skip, to avoid the present moment entirely. That is the purpose of our thoughts. And here's why. The ego uses time as follows. Sin is in the past. Guilt is in the present. And fear is the future. Sin is the past, guilt the present, fear the future. We have sinned in the past, feel guilty in the present, and are afraid of the future. But the guilt in the present is too overwhelming for us, so we push it outward onto the outside world, right? The Course says, every disordered thought is attended by guilt at its inception and maintained by guilt in its continuance. The cause for our disordered thought is guilt, and we maintain those thoughts through guilt. Guilt is the source of our thoughts about the past and the future. Without guilt, we would only think peaceful thoughts. The reason why we have thoughts about the past and about the future, and the reason why we don't arrive at the present moment, is that the present moment holds out only guilt if we are with the ego. As a natural response, we try to avoid the present moment at all cost, because the present moment has only guilt in store for us when we're with the ego. Guilt is literally blocking us from floating up and arriving at the lawns of heaven. guilt is our now if we're with the ego. That is the block to the awareness of love's presence. It should become more evident why in our current state of mind we cannot simply place the future in the hands of God. The reason is we are afraid of God. Our future is fear when we're with the ego, just as our past is sin and our present is guilt. It is here at that very moment when our goals and the ego's goals align completely. They are 100% identical. We don't want to come in contact with the guilt that is in the present moment. It is too overwhelming. And we believe that if God catches us with this guilt, He'll kill us. Plain and simple. He'll take the life back that we supposedly stole from Him. The ego doesn't want us to get in touch with the present, with the guilt, because here and now is the only time we can make a choice against it. So this moment now, right here, is where we don't want to go because we think guilt awaits us and God will kill us there. The ego doesn't want us to go because if we're at that point, we are closest to the possibility of deciding against it, the ego. So why then does Jesus tell us to place the future in the hands of God? If He knows we can't do it. Why does He say that? The reason is very simple and very profound at the same time. In our subconscious mind, we know that we're trying to avoid looking at our guilt. We know it. We also know that guilt keeps us from floating up to the lawns of heaven. Quote, "For it is guilt that has obscured the Father to you, and it is guilt that has driven you insane." That is in chapter 13, introduction. So guilt obscures the awareness of our oneness with God from us, right? We could go up to the lawns of heaven, become aware of the oneness of God, but guilt blocks us from doing so. When we practice lesson 194, for example, in which Jesus urges us very gently to place the future in the hands of God, we occupy that part of our mind for a moment, a holy instant, where we are free from the ego. That's when we read the lesson and we feel it, right? There's this one moment where we feel the lesson and we can breathe a little more deeply, right? We can come up for air. This reinforces our wish to go there, to stay there eventually. So the course's curriculum is set up that we become fully aware of the block, the ego, but also come in contact with the right mind, the Holy Spirit. And lastly, we learn through practicing the principles of the course sets forth that we have a choice between the two thought systems. Those are the three pillars of the course's curriculum. We have an ego, we have a right mind, and we have a choice between the two. That is the whole course in a nutshell. And because everything is a matter of motivation, right, as we all know, the more of those moments we have where we can feel, if it's only for a short instant, that love is still there waiting for us in some way, shape, or form, the stronger our wish to get there will be. Because the ego's motivation is so strong, it's 100% all the time. We need to develop our wish to leave the ego behind. We have to develop that. We have to learn it. Our motivation to choose the Holy Spirit must become stronger than our motivation to stay with the ego. The two ways in which Jesus accomplishes this is to show us both choices, so we can fully experience both choices, not only theoretically, but experientially, and then arrive at the conclusion ourselves. To summarize, in working with lesson 194 or any other lesson or any concept in the course, we eventually come to the conclusion that if we don't experience peace, it is because we have decided against it, actively decided against it. We have decided against peace because we are afraid of it. We are afraid of peace because we believe we are sinful and the corresponding guilt is too much for us to handle, so we push it outside to be safe from it. When we're with the ego, guilt occupies the present moment due to our belief that we have sinned in the past. This guilt causes us to be afraid of the future, even if that future would be peaceful. That's the oxymoron. When we're with the ego, all we have in the present moment is guilt. That guilt we try to project outward, so we see it in other people, we see it in the world. And if we're honestly looking at ourselves, we realize that there's very little time we spend when we don't project this guilt onto other people. There's always somebody we're trying to give this guilt to, right? Because we don't want to be in touch with it. Because we think if we're in touch with it, God will kill us. That's why guilt is the thing that blocks the access to the lawns of heaven and to the oneness of God. The counterpoint to the ego's guilt that occupies the present moment is the holy instant. The Course talks a lot about that. The holy instant is the very moment where we look at our guilt, no longer deny it. We look at the guilt which is mostly seen in other people, and we ask Jesus for help to look at this guilt with us, without judgment. That is forgiveness. That is the forgiveness the Course talks about, to look at our guilt without judgment. And this forgiveness frees us from the ego for a moment. And the more we look at the guilt that occupies the present, the more transparent it becomes, because it is based on a lie which states that it is possible to separate from God. So guilt is not real, but we cannot arrive at that conclusion unless we look at it. We look at it very, very closely, and the closer we look with Jesus, the longer we look with Jesus, the more transparent it becomes. But if we don't look, it is this massive block that blocks us from deciding for God. Eventually, we will switch from guilt to forgiveness as our present state of mind. The present moment with the Holy Spirit is seeing others through the eyes of forgiveness. The present moment with the ego is seeing guilt in other people. When we switch from guilt to forgiveness as our present state of mind, we can fully place the future in the hands of God. In fact, it will happen automatically. There's nothing we need to do to accomplish this. All we need to do is have the blocks removed, and then we will very gently float up to the lawns of heaven. As a closing, we can look at the last two paragraphs of lesson 194. It's kind of the other bookend of this lesson. Jesus says, "Place then your future in the hands of God. For thus you call the memory of him to come again, replacing all your thoughts of sin and evil with the truth of love. Think you the world could fail to gain thereby, and every living creature not respond with healed perception? Who entrusts himself to God has also placed the world within the hands to which he has himself appealed for comfort and security. He lays aside the sick illusions of the world along with his and offers peace to both. Now are we saved indeed. For in God's hands we rest untroubled, sure that only good can come to us. If we forget, we will be gently reassured. If we accept an unforgiving thought, it will be soon replaced by love's reflection. And if we are tempted to attack, we will appeal to him who guards our rest to make the choice for us that leaves temptation far behind. No longer is the world our enemy, for we have chosen that we be its friend. Thanks so much for watching.